everyone, it's Casey Reese from Wonders of Wildlife National Museum and Aquarium here, and this week we are here to talk to you about ocean appreciation. So this is actually our last week to talk about ocean appreciation, our newest mission for the month of November. So all you have to do is log on to www.wondersofwildlife.org/mission-conservation in order to play this awesome mission. So if you are wanting to play the mission, all you have to do is scroll down to get the app. That's going to take you to our downloading the Agents of Discovery app. After that, all you have to do is scroll down to print the triggers. This helps you either print or download these triggers so you can either have them a physical copy to go play outside, or you can play on your computer at home. One last thing that we have for you on this website is if you scroll down to the schedule of missions and activities and you go to our Agent Salmon Ocean Appreciation, that's going to show you our activity guide that we have for you for the month of November. So something really fun to do indoors like a craft, a really awesome activity for you to do outdoors. And it also will take you to our reward, which is a Snapchat filter for you. With us today, we have an awesome guest. She's an outreach specialist from NOAA. Sarah Bailey, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys for having me on Ocean Week. This is very exciting.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. What do you have for us today?
I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite animals that I don't think gets enough love and credit. So I'm really excited to be sharing it with you guys today.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Casey, again for the introduction. My name is Sarah Bailey, and like Casey said, I am an outreach specialist. I work for the National Marine Fisheries Service, and I am up in our field station in Orono, Maine, which I'll show you guys on a map in just a little bit because not a lot of people know where Orono, Maine is. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about an endangered species and one of my favorites, the Atlantic salmon. Next. So NOAA partnered with Agents of Discovery on a new Sea Run Go mission. We started it last year in support of International Year of the Salmon, which was 2019. It seemed like a really great fit because we're always looking to talk about Atlantic salmon and other sea run fish in really interesting new ways. And what cooler way to work with the next generation than something like a mobile app. And of course, the added bonus of getting people outside and exploring on their own. Next. So where am I? If you look, that's a map of the United States. I know some of us are tuning in from maybe different countries, maybe different time zones, but that star on the far top of the map is where I am. So if you look, I kind of blew up that area. And as you'll notice, all those little red dots are NOAA field stations. And one of the questions that we get asked more so than anything for our little field station, that top one right there, the Orono field station, is why isn't our dot along the river? And that's a really good question. We are or why is our dot not on the ocean? It's a really good question because we are the National Marine Fisheries Service. But the reason that our dot is not on the ocean is because we study a really unique, special kind of fish that's something called a diadromous species. So a diadromous species is a species that spends half of its life cycle in fresh waters like rivers and streams, and half of its life in the ocean. So that's why we are on gorgeous Penobscot River and then we're not on the ocean. Next. So this is what it looks like peak summer where I'm from. We've got a lot of gorgeous rivers. And if you look on that map to your right, every one of those blue lines is a river. So in the state of Maine, we have over 31,000 miles of river. And I know that this is Ocean Week, and I will talk a little bit about oceans, but to kind of give a little appreciation of 31,000 miles, and to just kind of put that in context, the equator, so that line that runs all the way around the globe, the Earth, that's about 25,000 miles. So we have more river systems in Maine than the entire length of the equator. So as you can tell, rivers are really kind of our bread and butter in Maine. They're really important. Next. So what can you find in those rivers in Maine? It is this gorgeous Atlantic salmon. So this is a male Atlantic salmon. This picture was taken in the hatchery. And these guys are critically endangered. And over the course of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about why the Atlantic salmon is so endangered. But just something to know about these guys. They are absolutely gorgeous. Their body is covered in these beautiful color changing cells that they can change color. They can go from freshwater to saltwater. They're kind of like superheroes, I think. I like to think of them as a superhero fish because a lot of the things that these guys can do, not many other fish can do. So next. So because it is Oceans Week, I did promise that we would talk about oceans, as these guys have a really unique life cycle. So their life begins as little eggs in the rivers in Maine and freshwater, and slowly they hatch, and they'll spend a couple of years as fry and then par in the river environments. And then slowly they'll start to turn this gorgeous silver color, and that's called smultification. Now, when these guys turn silver, that means they are ready to exit their freshwater stream habitats in which they were born in. And then they'll begin their journey to migrate out to the ocean. They'll go about 2,000 to 3,000 miles offshore and to their feeding grounds off the coast of Greenland, which we'll see in the next slide. And then they'll come all the way back to the very rivers in which they were spawned to begin that life cycle all over again. Next. So here's that life cycle just shown in a different way that shows that big migration. And the really cool thing about Atlantic salmon is adult Atlantic salmon will only be about 4 feet long. And when you imagine a 4-foot long animal going about 2,000 miles, I'm about a little taller than 5 feet. And I think I can maybe go a couple of miles on a good day. So a 2,000-mile migration is huge. And the reason that they go and do these big migrations is because that's where their best feeding grounds are. And that's where they're going to get the most nutrient-rich food in order to then have enough energy to swim all the way back and all the way up their rivers so that they can spawn and begin their life cycle all over again. Next. So here's just a really great picture that shows the kind of resiliency of salmon. They are absolutely driven to return back to those rivers and spawn so that they can produce the next generation of Atlantic salmon. But like I said earlier, these guys are critically endangered. So what does that mean? Next. So historically, we had hundreds of thousands of Atlantic salmon that would return all up the coast of New England. So as far south as Long Island Sound, all the way through Maine. And our historic values were about 100,000 or so. So if you look at this picture, each one of those Atlantic salmon represents about 1,000 fish. So how many returns did we have this past year? If you want to look at the next slide, we only had about 1,500 Atlantic salmon return to the state of Maine. And that's the only wild salmon runs that are left. Next. So this quick animation shows the full range of where the Atlantic salmon used to return. And right now, those are the only places in the United States that you can still find wild Atlantic salmon. I know that sounds crazy to some of you guys because you think Atlantic salmon, I see that in the grocery store all the time. I see that on restaurant menus. And that's a really good question is, if I see it all the time, how can it be so critically endangered? Is all of those salmon that you're seeing that's Atlantic salmon in grocery stores, those are all farm-raised Atlantic salmon. So we only have about 1,500 wild Atlantic salmon left in the United States. Next. So what's happening? Why are the salmon so endangered? A lot of it has to do with their blocked rivers. So remember when we were talking about that really unique life cycle, that diadromous, that half ocean, half river? Salmon would exit the river systems. They would go off the coast of Greenland. They get nice and big and fat. And then when they would return, a lot of those streams and rivers had been blocked. So we've got, on one picture, we have a dam. So there's several kinds of dams. A lot of dams might generate energy. They might be holding back water to produce water for various floodplains. But over the course of about 100 years or so, a couple hundred years, rivers and streams became really blocked in the state of Maine. Next. And this is a really good job of illustrating that. So that picture on the far side of the screen with all of that blue, those are the historic waterways that I showed you in that earlier slide. And that picture in the middle, every single one of those red dots represents a block stream, whether it's a hydroelectric dam, a regular dam, a road crossing. Every single one of those dots represents impassable or not crossable stream for Atlantic salmon. And if you look at that map, that's the one with only the little bit of blue. That is currently the only access that Atlantic salmon has to their historic habitat today. Next. So what else happened? Not only have their rivers become blocked, but there's a lot of things that find Atlantic salmon tasty, humans included. But aside from humans, we've got various predators in different parts of their environment. So if you look on the left part of the screen, we've got a dark seabird called a cormorant, or on the other side of the screen is a gray seal. The reason we know that cormorants eat these fish is we conduct a lot of research in the office that I'm in. This is not an Atlantic salmon. It is a disclaimer. This is a rainbow smolt, or not a rainbow smolt, a rainbow trout, which is another freshwater species. But we conduct a lot of research in our office in which we will take these little transmitters and we'll sew them up in the bellies of those Atlantic salmon. And then we will put a bunch of these telemetry receivers in the stream. So when that fish will swim by, just like two cell phones, it will pick up the receiver and the transmitter so that we know where this fish is at all times. Now, a lot of times, as this fish leaves the system, we can follow and track as it goes down the river. But sometimes that transmitter and receiver will stop pinging and will only be pinging in one location. So then we'll take our boat out and we'll take a look and do a land survey and see where that's pinging. And more often than not, if it's just in one location, it's probably going to be in a cormorant rookery, which is where those black seabirds like to live. So that's just a little bit about the science that we conduct in our office. I could go on all day about it, but just one of the reasons we know that cormorants are a main predator for these guys and at this life stage. So when they're about 2 or 3 years old and they're first exiting our river systems. But the other predators that we do have in the ocean environment are gray seals. Next. So getting out of the river is only half the problem. So they're born, they've got to survive getting out of the river where there's cormorants, where there's blocked rivers, and then they make it all the way out into their feeding grounds in the Atlantic off the coast of Greenland, and they've got even bigger problems. So if you see those two fish, that's something called a capelin. That is an Atlantic salmon's favorite kind of food. It is really fatty, it is really nutrient heavy, it is really rich, and it is perfect to give them the amount of energy that they need to be able to re-migrate back. But other research that we're doing is we'll actually look at the stomach contents of Atlantic salmon, and we're finding that they're eating less nutritious things like that arm hook squid that you see there. And that's kind of like eating a lot of candy for dinner instead of eating a great big salad. If they don't have a lot of energy, they're not going to get big and they're not going to get fat, and it's going to be even more difficult for them to make their migration back to their rivers in Maine. Next. So what can we do? So we're scientists, so we love the scientific method. We ask ourselves a question: why are Atlantic salmon critically endangered? And then we conduct the research. We try to figure out all of the reasons why they're endangered. We know that if they can't get back to their rivers to spawn, there's going to be no more Atlantic salmon for the next generation. We know the things that like to get, or that the salmon get eaten by. So we know they could get eaten by striped bass or by cormorants, by seals. We know that they're eating less nutritious food up in the marine environment. So what can we do? What kind of creative solutions as problem solvers and as scientists can we do to help figure out how we can work on restoring Atlantic salmon? Next. So here are some of my favorite creative solutions. So one of the biggest problems that we talked about was connectivity. So here on your screen, you'll see 2 examples of ways for fish to get around those impediments. So remember that big dam that blocked the river, or that undersized culvert? Here's a perfect example. So these are fish ladders or fish weirs, you might have heard of them. And that allows the fish to travel safely upstream and downstream to make sure that they can get that access to that really important habitat, that spawning ground. They are man-made. The one on the left is made to look a little bit more like what it might look like in nature. but they're both creative solutions to help pass fish around impediments. Next. So here's another one, and this is about 10 miles north from our office. So it's one of my favorites. It's really, really cool. This is called a nature-like bypass. So when a fish ladder is too small to be able to pass an impediment, they will actually carve a brand new stream to pass all the way around the dam. So if you look at that gorgeous aerial photo on the right, you can see that there's a little stream that's been carved out to go around that dam. So this is large scale restoration efforts to try to get fish up to those really important habitats so that it can spawn and produce Atlantic salmon for the future generations. Next. So this is actually my favorite, and it is called a fish ladder. It's this amazing bit of technology that looks exactly like a human elevator would, where a fish will come up to the gates will open, the fish will swim in, and it will then mechanically lift them up and over the dam. So that big piece of machinery on the right is a fish lift. Now, we recently had one built at the lowermost dam on the Penobscot, which is where the last stronghold of Atlantic salmon are. And it passed about 1,500 Atlantic salmon this year. But the price tag was, if you guys could guess how much something like that would cost, an elevator for Atlantic salmon was about $18 million. And that was just on one dam, on one of those red dots. But again, it's one of those creative solutions to help pass fish up these impediments so they can make it to spawn. It's really the name of the game when it comes to Atlantic salmon. Next. So what else can we do? These are really great projects that can happen over the course of a summer to improve connectivity is undersized culvert removal. So if you look at that picture on the right, on the left, there's a small culvert in that dark mass right below it. Those are all alewives, which is another type of sea-run fish. And as you can see, they're all schooling below it because they can't pass through that. So we work with a lot of organizations that will raise money throughout the course of the year to be able to take down that undersized culvert and put in something like you see on the right. And that's called an expansion bridge that allows for safe passage under a lot of road crossings for fish to be able to make their way upstream. And if you look on the next slide, we actually have a really great time-lapse video for you guys. So this video, oh, I think we went a couple ones too soon. Going a little bit ahead, but that's fine. Right here. So you'll see in about 30 seconds what took about 2 months to complete. So here you'll see another one of those undersized culverts. And again, these are in reaches in Maine that not a lot of people get to go and visit and see. So it's really great to bring these pieces of machinery in to fix these undersized culverts to be able to provide really great fish passage. And as you can see, the before and after is dramatically different than prior to the restoration effort. Next. So we've talked about fish ladders, we've talked about fish elevators, nature-like bypasses, but one of our favorite best ways to improve connectivity, it's obviously also the most ideal, is a total dam removal. So this is a picture that was taken in 2017 of the Cooper's Mills Dam. It's on a river called the Sheepscot River. And then if you go to the next slide, here's how it looks today. So obviously, ideally, we love to see these clean, connected rivers that fish don't have to navigate a fish ladder, or fish don't have to navigate it. A total removal provides much greater access for fish to be able to swim upstream. And this project specifically was really great. It actually helped open up 71 more miles of river for Atlantic salmon. Next. So what else do we do? What else can we do? We've talked a lot about helping get fish up rivers, but some of our other restoration efforts are a little bit more hands-on. In the winter, which is when salmon eggs start eyeing, we will actually take salmon eggs from the hatchery, these wild salmon eggs, and we will go plant them in the river. So if you want to play that video on the right, it's a really cool process. We get all geared up and we get on the backs of snowmobiles because that's the only way to get to the river. And we will go several miles off the beaten path on the road to be able to put these salmon back in their gravel beds so that when they hatch, they're hatching in the wild and they have a better chance of survival. And if you go to the next slide as well, you can see a little bit more of that process with some of my other coworkers helping out. It's about, last time I did this, it was like negative 15 degrees. It's really cold. You got to move really quickly. All the eggs are wrapped in these really gentle cloth to be able to dig them into gravel beds and kind of mimic that process of when Atlantic salmon spawn, to get them really embedded in that nice, healthy gravel so that they can hatch as little alvin, as little fry, as little par, and then hopefully begin that big journey that they have ahead of them. Next. So is anything that we're doing helping? Is it making a difference? Are all of these restoration efforts that we just talking about moving the needle for Atlantic salmon? So Atlantic salmon are really slow to respond to restoration efforts just because they have that really unique life cycle that we were talking about, where they spend half their lives in the freshwater, half their lives in the saltwater. They take a little bit longer to mature. So it's a little bit slower to see salmon rebound, but what we have seen is this amazing return of other sea-run fish. So something like a river herring or an alewife is coming back in numbers that we haven't seen in the state in a very long time. So this is just a video of some alewives that are returning, and they come back every year. So in about 2012, we had approximately 2,000 to 5,000 alewives return. And then this past year alone, we had just south of 2 million alewife return. And that was after 2 of the lowermost dams were removed on the Penobscot. So what we're seeing is anything that we're doing to improve salmon habitat is really improving the habitat as a whole. So when we remove a dam, it's not just the salmon that are going to benefit, but it's other things like the other diadromous fish species like alewives, the American eel, sturgeon, which is also really cool that I could talk about for at length for another presentation for another day. But what we are seeing is that the environments and that these rivers are beginning to heal themselves with all these restoration efforts. Next. So what can you do? I know that some of you guys watching this from home might not live on a river, might not live on an ocean, but that doesn't mean that there's not something that you can do. You can take what you've learned today and you can share that knowledge. You can talk to your friends, your classmates, aunts, uncles, moms, dads. You can tell them, hey, did you know Atlantic salmon are endangered? And you can start that conversation, because sharing knowledge is also really important. You can start a cleanup, go along your local rivers, your streams, your waterways. You could let your town know that clean water and fresh water is really important to you, and making sure that your rivers and streams stay clean and healthy. And again, you can always learn more. Go to the Agents of Discovery website, download the mission. I would love to see anybody that's watched this now test their knowledge on the Sea Run Go app and see how you do and see what you've learned about Atlantic salmon. But again, just talking about it is really helpful for this species. And we just want to do as much as we possibly can for a really cool species that I don't think gets enough love and credit. So just talking about it is really great. Next. So that's all I have for you guys today. In what we say in Maine, just remember, you got to stay at least 3 Atlantic salmon worth of space between you and others. And I hope everybody has a great day. And if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to enter them in the chat or send me a message.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. I actually had no idea that Atlantic salmon were endangered species. So thank you for sharing that bit of knowledge with us. Also, I had one question from a little bit earlier. So you talked about how the smolt, part of their life, they have that silver coloration. And do they start to develop that just as like a counter shade camouflage for when they enter the ocean?
That's a really good question. So I wish I had a better visual, but But when salmon are pars, so that life cycle stage right before they turn into a smolt, they kind of look like this, and they have these barbs across from them, and they're really brownish because the environment that they're living in, it's these pebbly, rocky streams and rivers. So those bars, those dots, that brown coloration does a really great job of camouflaging them. But as you perfectly pointed out, they go under that process called smultification. They turn silver. Their backs become darker, their dorsal parts of their bodies, and their bellies become silver. So anybody that's a predator that might be swimming below them looking up would see that silver belly, and anybody that's swimming above them looking down will see that darker dorsal, because it's just perfect camouflage as they transition from one life in the river, and then they'll go off to the salty ocean where they're much better suited to not stick out as much as they would in the streams. It's a very good question.
Great, awesome. Well, that was the only question that I had for you. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you everyone else for joining us, as this is our last week in Ocean Appreciation. But don't worry, we will have our next Facebook Live next week on Tuesday, 1 p.m. Central Time. And we're going to be with Jordy, and he is from the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. So we'll see you next week at 1 o'clock. Thank you.